With Marvel's major crossover event complete with Avengers Endgame, a lingering question begins to arise. And that's how the films will continue and who will be the next major antagonist for our battle-worn heroes to battle against next.
Because there's no rest for the weary, and there's always a new evil looming around the corner, let's discuss who the next possible major villain in the MCU could be.
To start with, let's recall the post-credit scene of Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
It's a new type of birthing pod, man?
That, my child, is the next step in our evolution. More powerful, more beautiful, more capable of destroying the Guardians of the Galaxy. I think I shall call him Adam.
Adam Warlock, as he comes to be called in the comics, has ultra-human just about everything, and as we can see from the clip, it seems this will definitely be the case in the MCU. However, the MCU and comics have his origins a little different. In the comics, Adam Warlock is born from Earth scientists trying to create the perfect human, and what they created was first called him. Without a strong moral compass, but not necessarily evil, with his first ever act being to stop the scientists from their evil scheming, but his second act in capturing Thor's girlfriend, the goddess Sif, because he wants her and finds her pleasing to his eyes. Things get really weird when Adam is given the Infinity Gauntlet, and it causes him to literally expel the good and evil aspects from his soul, leaving Adam himself a purely logical being. The evil manifests as Magus, a time-traveling villain who travels to the past to form the Universal Church of Truth as a religious empire, and attempts to manipulate a younger Adam Warlock into events that will cause his creation. All of that said, our starting point with the MCU is entirely different, with Adam now being created by the Golden High Priestess of the Sovereign for the purpose of defeating the Guardians of the Galaxy. So perhaps we'll see an evil version of Adam as a major antagonist, although if this stays true to the comics, one who will end up having a good, evil, and maybe even an emotionalist version of himself in the end. It's difficult to imagine upping the stakes after Thanos, a character who achieved annihilating half of the entire population of the known universe with the snap of his finger.
But what about a character who existed in a universe before ours?
A character whose background involves him merging with the sentience of the universe, surviving the Big Bang and billions of years in an egg, as he would evolve into a new being known as Galactus. Like the MCU's Thanos, Galactus' motivations differ from many of your regular supervillains who simply want world domination, galaxy domination, or whatever sort of domination suits their kink. Galactus' motivation comes purely out of hunger, with no regard to morality or the lack thereof. This larger-than-life being searches the cosmos for planets he can consume for sustenance, which would serve as a great counter to Thanos, whose reasons were based on his own perceived morality. The modus operandi of this larger-than-life would-be antagonist of Earth is to send a herald with cosmic powers out in search of planets for him to consume. And the most notable herald of Galactus comes in the form of the Silver Surfer, who specifically agreed to help out Galactus in exchange for the Purple Goliath spaceman sparing his own planet. And to Galactus, we're nothing but a source of food and nutrients to keep him alive, so it could be the perfect new antagonist to introduce, as well as a whole step up from what we've seen before.
For this one, we're going to have to travel a little bit into the future.
10 centuries into the future, to the 31st century where Nathaniel Richards discovers time travel technology originally created by Dr. Doom. He uses this to travel deep into the past and to Egyptian times where he becomes a pharaoh, Rama-Tut. In the comics, he's defeated by the Fantastic Four, who have also been displaced in time. He then travels to the 20th century where he meets Dr. Doom, fashions his armor after the Doctor, calls himself the Scarlet Centurion, and schemes to defeat the Avengers with alternate reality Avengers. So while this is one possibility for Kang, or rather the Scarlet Centurion, with Kang failing this particular scheme, he decides to go back home to the 31st century, but screws up and travels even further into the future to a war-torn Earth. Here he manages to conquer the planet and eventually the galaxy. Finally, he renames himself Kang the Conqueror. However, all isn't well in the world of Kang as Earth is dying, so he decides to, once again, travel back to the 20th/21st century in order to take over a normal Earth.
All of that said, due to how important Dr. Doom is to Kang's backstory, I find it pretty unlikely we'll see him appearing anytime soon.
However, he could be an interesting precursor to Doctor Doom if the MCU decides to go this particular route, with him traveling to a time before the Avengers became aware of Doctor Doom and even act as a way to establish Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom is an interesting one, as his backstory motivations are so strongly tied to Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four. But now that Disney owns Fox, there's definitely a possibility the Fantastic Four could be introduced to the MCU, and if they are, Doctor Doom along with them. Victor Von Doom was born in the fictional country of Latveria, a country near Romania, Serbia, and Hungary, to a gypsy tribe. His mother was a witch and father a medicine man, however both died at different points in his childhood. He eventually discovered his mother's occult instruments and was able to create amazing inventions with a natural knack for both sorcery and technology. Thanks to this, he was given the offer to study abroad at Empire State University in the United States and took up that opportunity, becoming roommates with Reed Richards, before Reed would become Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four. The two didn't get along, and Victor switched roommates. His time in college would be short-lived as he tried to invent a machine to speak with the dead. Despite warnings from Reed Richards of miscalculations, Von Doom tried to use it anyways to horrible results. The machine exploded, scarring Von Doom's face and getting himself expelled from the college. It was after this he eventually took on the mantle of Doctor Doom and would constantly antagonize those he felt were responsible for his accident, primarily Reed Richards. Typically, Doctor Doom's motivations either draw around vengeance for those who he perceives to have wronged him, or world domination. The introduction of Captain Marvel into the MCU also meant the introduction of the SKRULLS. As we've seen in Captain Marvel, these aliens can transform themselves to assume the identity of anyone, and yes, in some cases that includes their superhuman powers, as there are Super SKRULLS who can replicate even this. Sure, the MCU's SKRULLS are mostly kind-hearted refugees, but they've also been at war for hundreds of years, right? There's bound to be some SKRULLS out there who don't subscribe to Talos' ideals of living in peace. What that means, if the MCU decides to go down this route, is that any single one of our Marvel heroes could actually have secretly been a Super SKRULL all along. With ANNIHILUS, we have another antagonist originating from the Fantastic Four. However, unlike Doctor Doom, I don't think he's so intrinsically tied to them. ANNIHILUS is an inhabitant, warlord, and sometimes ruler over the Negative Zone. The Negative Zone being a parallel universe to Earth where, as the name would imply, all matter is negatively charged. Essentially the reverse of Earth, where atoms contain positively charged protons and are surrounded by electrons, which are negatively charged particles. This would presumably be the exact reverse. While ANNIHILUS most frequently battles off against members of the Fantastic Four, he has allied with Thanos, and at one point declared the universe Earth belongs to also a part of his territory, building a fleet of warships dubbed the Annihilation Wave to take it over, with the ultimate goal of wiping out all of life in both the universe and Negative Zone, making himself the sole survivor. If that's not bad enough, he's been shown to be able to be extremely powerful in his own right, and is even reborn upon death. The Builders are a relatively new addition to the revolving door of cosmic threats to the Marvel Universe, introduced in the same story, Infinity, that gave us characters like Thanos' Black Order. They're essentially the first sentient life forms in the universe, a race of ancient aliens that created the systems in which all life is organized across time and space. They're called Builders because, well, that's what they do. They build worlds, life, and galaxies throughout multiple dimensions, and then eventually they destroy them and start over. Long story short, eventually the Builders come to collect on Earth, deeming it a sort of failed experiment that now needs to be terminated, which forces the Avengers to team up with just about every major force in the galaxy, from the Kree Accusers to the Shi'ar Empire, to bring them down. Bringing the Builders into the MCU wouldn't be easy, but they would be a fantastic way to one-up the threat that Thanos has represented for these last 10 years. And given just how powerful they are, and what it took to fight them in the comics, they could be a fantastic way to bring in Disney's newly acquired Fox characters and teams, while also bringing some other parts of the MCU full circle. After all, the Kree Empire, the Nova Corps, and the Sovereign are all still out there, just waiting in the wings. Considering we just had an MCU Civil War recently, this one's pretty unlikely, but it is worth mentioning there was a second Civil War in the comics, this time showcasing Iron Man and Captain Marvel butting heads. So now that we have Carol Danvers in the MCU, it does make this a somewhat limited possibility. Similar to the first Civil War, this comes from a budding of ideologies, with Civil War II taking on a very Minority Report-esque feel. A new character with the power to accurately predict the future comes into the mix. With this, Captain Marvel believes all would-be evildoers should be caught before the crime, whereas Iron Man believes the punishment cannot come before the crime. Come on, Carol, have you never seen Minority Report? You can't arrest someone before they've done anything wrong. And another possibility I find to be a little more unlikely, Ultron frequently returns in the comics new and improved. Whether this being rebuilt by Dr. Doom, or Ultron's own creations, which are compelled to recreate their creator.
Yes, I did just use the word create 3 different ways in one sentence.
And let's not forget the time Ultron came back, but in the form of a naked the Wasp, because it has a weird love complex for who it considers its mother, as Hank Pym created Ultron in the comics. Or the time Hank Pym and Ultron literally fused into one creature, we'll call him Pymtron, who then made an Empire of Ultron drones up somewhere in the frozen tundra. Anyways, point is, Ultron keeps finding ways to come back in the comics. But I personally find it pretty unlikely the MCU will go down the route of reusing former villains in this manner. While we haven't seen Norman Osborn yet as of Spider-Man Homecoming, there could be a reason for that. There's a possibility that he'll be introduced into the MCU as the upcoming major villain and threat. While he does become the Green Goblin, certainly a plot point that will be brought up if he is introduced, that really isn't a catastrophe worthy of the Avengers. However, in more recent Marvel comics, Norman manages to essentially make himself the new Nick Fury and in charge of the Avengers. In the comics, this is thanks to him successfully helping repel the SKRULLS, a threat we've already seen introduced with Captain Marvel and that will possibly be brought back. After the government reassigns him in charge of the Avengers, he creates his own team, the Dark Avengers. This group consists of supervillains posing as members of the Avengers and working for the government to do Norman's bidding and dirty work. This group sees Venom posing as Spider-Man, Bullseye posing as Hawkeye, and more. It's very Skrull-esque in that way, but it could be fun to see the Dark Avengers facing off against the true Avengers. And that wraps up some of what we consider to be the most likely candidates for the MCU's next big bad. Who do you find to be the most likely, and who would you most like to see? Do you think it could be an X-Men villain now that Disney owns Fox? Let us know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.